I'm going to talk about AI and lighting very broadly, is what I was asked to. But first, before I speak about AI, I want to talk about the lighting industry in general. And I want to tear down some of the constructs that we're so used to and rebuild it so we get to a proper place where AI will be very effective. One audience participation I'm going to ask, how many of you look at this image and think of this as architectural lighting? One hand, two hands. Okay, what's the biggest light source in this room right now? It's the giant LED wall that's right here behind us. How many controls dimming circuits do you think are in here? Well, if it's 4K, it's something like, 16 million LEDs. Probably more points of lighting control in this one screen than the entire rest of the missing. But yet people still don't believe this. And I contend that, wouldn't you love to hang out in this room? Wouldn't you love to see what you could do psychologically in terms of lighting design and lighting effects, how it affects your feeling, your health? How do you want to interact in that space? But yet, when I walk around the show floor here, I keep thinking about Richard Kelly Grant, in the previous presentation for Airco. I'm thinking to myself, well, Seagram's building is 68 years old, and this is kind of the paradigm of modern lighting, where we had Richard Kelly, you had Edison Price, you had Phyllis, you had Bees, you had Philip. These were revolutionary people at the time, right? They were taking classical architecture and throwing it away and inventing all new technologies and fixture designs and new application concepts, right, to achieve what they were working on, right? Do you really think that if that crew was alive today, they would walk through the show floor and be so impressed that someone made a slightly smaller spotlight, or yet another downlight that's a little bit smaller in the trim size? Absolutely not. I believe that Richard Kelly would be standing looking at this wall and thinking, what can I do with this thing? And we all like to talk about focal glow, ambient luminescence, and flare brilliance, but we often forget that Richard Kelly had a very good idea about the animation of light, right? He always said that light itself, as a physical force, can have the regular occurrence effects, as does the wind. And he had these 6 pieces of intensity, brightness, diffusion, spectral color, direction, and motion. He never thought of this lighting as a still, stagnant composition, right? Even though that's what the technologies at the time allowed. In fact, when you really look at his old Four Seasons restaurant, there was the fountain with the lighting in it that created sparkle all over the place. The brass rod shivered in the air movement, the brass curtains. He was desperately trying to put a play of brilliance. He's trying to put motion into his designs, right? Well, now we have these magical materials of LED where we've completely dematerialized light sources. We can now make this magical surface that can display any light you want in any resolution with any data, any visual imagery you want. So we're no longer constrained to slow rotating gobos like we have here on the ceiling, right? And this is now shrunk to the size where it's basically an architectural material. It's literally the size of a tile, a porcelain tile. What you don't know is that in the virtual production world where all these technologies are coming from, micro LEDs have so shrunk to size that most of these screens are actually black when you don't see them on. And also they've been adding now RGB white, RGB cyan, and amber, because there's needs in the virtual production film and broadcast studios for better skin rendition and skin tone. So a lot of the core technologies are there that pretty soon, when you have 5 or 6 or 7 channels of spectrum built into these wall surfaces, you'll be able to control circadian rhythm lighting very accurately on top of everything else with the screen. So let's go back to 1929, and you're telling me Richard Kelly, if he had access to this, would still be, doing travertine marble? Maybe, but I think he would also be doing something like this, where he would have surfaces that were beautiful and sumptuous, with just the right rate of motion and the right animation that creates a vivid, beautiful space that you just want to chill out and stare at that wall after a long day. Let's tear down a few other things. I am totally over lighting controls. As any of you have talked to me will know, that basically all the lighting systems in the architecture world are stuck in this paradigm. This is a old ETC console before it was even ETC, from the early 80s. And like our all of our lighting controls are stuck in this notion of preset scenes. And that's just crippling our ability as the lighting community to get beyond that and do something more novel with this, right? So in fact, let's strip down lighting to a few new ideas. The first thing, I don't have time to go over this, but I have given an entire presentation, please look it up on YouTube, called the DC powered building, where I talked about everything in a modern building is DC power. In fact, every single light source that I can see here ultimately is DC power going to the LEDs, right? And in fact, all of the energy generation on the buildings, DC power, the battery storage, DC power, the variable speed motors, DC power, all of the devices in the building, DC power, the charging outside in the parking lot, DC power. It's obvious that buildings need to go to DC power infrastructure. Why does that matter for lighting? Well, once you go to DC power infrastructure, you get off of this old clunky AC stuff with manual switching, glommed on with like sensors and IoT smart stuff. And the actual power infrastructure goes digital. The actual control of the electrons goes digital. And suddenly you can just have 48 volts going straight from your solar panels into your lighting without transformation, and you get way more energy efficient. So this is why you're going to start to see DC slowly but surely take over everything. A few years ago, you started to see 48 volt track systems here already, right? And that's just like so obvious, low hanging fruit. We need to redefine how people act because, I'm sorry, but people are not sitting in their 1960s open offices reading stacks of papers anymore. People don't read anymore, much more read anything on paper. So we have to redefine how people really live and act. And we need to get real about what is the best practices nowadays, knowing all we know about psychology, human retina system, and all of these various things that we did not have in the 80s and the 90s, on and on. And then once we get to that point, once we get there, suddenly we can actually start to use AI to optimize human health and wellness, which is the ultimate goal for all of this, right? Let's talk about a better control system first and foremost to replace the old notion of preset scenes. So on the left here, I can jump over here. And look, I can walk right up to this big shiny light source and show you data on it. On the left side, we're going to have data inputs. You're going to have local sensing. You're going to have data tables. Then you have a processing engine where you have sort of if-then logic systems. You have media content. You have abstraction. You have generative engines, whether that's live rendering like Unreal or AI systems. And then on the output side, everything is basically a pixel. I've said this in previous conferences where every light is now a pixel and every pixel is now a light. And if you think about it, at some point, every modern lighting control system is pushing control through IP, whether that's this video signal or those DMX signals or those Dolly signals. It's all on the same Ethernet cable. So why not just think of it all as one unified pixel mapped environment? Now, if this blows your mind, hang on, because we have to think about the world of AI. So what this does is this turns environments into live sort of portals to the virtual world. Data-driven, live, responsive. No longer is something stuck in a preset scene, like Le Corbusier's notion of architecture is the masterly play of forms bathed in light, thinking that his forms are concrete and the light being the daylight that goes over that, and there's nothing else. Well, no. Now our forms are bathed in data and can drive anything we want. So what happens is that then creates the AI machine learning loop where your environmental space starts to have intelligence. It starts to know your patterns. It starts to remember your patterns. It starts to predict your behavior. And then that sends it right into your live data feed that is controlling your space, right? So it's no longer like I need a spreadsheet to craft scene 1 and scene 2 and scene 3, and that maybe someone will push randomly some buttons and hopefully get it. So now, is this architectural lighting? Well, I mean, I'm literally, and from my perspective, standing in front of this beautiful fiery wall, zoning out, right? What if this woman is having a beautiful yoga experience and there's a whole bunch of variables driving the rate of this effect, the play of brilliance, the ambient luminescence? We also, I'm going to keep harping on this a little bit, right? How many of you have put this in? And when you get out there, people randomly push the numbers because they have no idea what the buttons do. So it's not even a linear thing like what theater originally had, where it was the beginning, middle, and end. That would be a huge improvement. We need to think of space and time as cyclical phases. Everything should be thought of as cycles of time and scales of time, so that you can have seasons, holidays, sports, events, whatever it needs to be for your project. And don't you think that a modern building should change across the day, should change across the seasons? Maybe it could represent holidays, and maybe it could represent special events, depending on your project and client type. What if you were doing a luxury residential suite and it's in winter and it's the Christmas time and it's a child's birthday? Shouldn't this wall be automatically generating some sort of picture backdrop that looks gorgeous for your birthday party? That's easy to do. That's 3 seconds on Midjourney. You can get that. Why can't we build that into our systems? So then as a designer, you have to start to think about layering, the prioritization of layers of time and scales of time. Again, I challenge you to think, is this architectural lighting? I think most people would love to believe that architectural lighting can be some sort of daylight is the pure thing. And everybody's imagining the beautiful window filled with daylight with the spectacular view of the bucolic green park. The reality is most projects barely have windows. If they do have windows, it's overlooking the chilling plant in the parking garage, right? And a lot of our constructed space does not have access to daylight or windows. And you have to light that space, and people have to occupy and live in those spaces. So let's get real. What can you do to make that space a beautiful experience for people to live in, even though there's no windows and there's no daylight? Oftentimes, this is where folks will start to get derailed off on the whole privacy discussion, like, ooh, privacy, you can't monitor anybody. And I get so frustrated with that, because there's this sort of phases of anonymity is what I call it, or a spectrum of privacy that is how we actually live. If you live in a mud hut somewhere, you are untracked except for the footprints you leave in the dirt. But in a modern building environment, how many of you went to the restrooms right here, stuck your hands under the faucet, and they turned on? Well, the building is tracking you. The building is monitoring you. It just has no memory and it has no personalization. But it understood you were there and it responded to you and it turned on water for you, right? And then how about we just talk about basic interfaces? You go to McDonald's and you touch something that looks like a wall surface and you are touching and ordering and you're giving it tons of data even though you are anonymous, you're not there. But then you have to check in. There are plenty of valid reasons in life and in the built environment where you have to check in. How many of you would like to go on an airplane where everybody retains their privacy? Or check into a hotel where nobody has to check in and to give their privacy, or a healthcare environment where you can just wander in private? You can't. So obviously you have to give your data, you have to check in. The moment you pay for goods, you've checked in, you've given up your privacy. There's lots of perfectly valid reasons. So let's design our environments so that they start to recognize this and use that data to customize as much as you can to the person involved. Then you get into these sort of higher levels of service concept. How can your lighting serve people actively to help with their task? And then once you get into that feedback loop where the surfaces are digital, the data-driven, and the data is live, and it's re-feeding itself in through AI, you get this sort of magic predictive behavior where the building is going to act moments before you do because it's figured out what your pattern is. Notice the title on this is Your Friend the Wall. So maybe our client here rough day, all day long talking to the AI, 7 meetings, brutal commute, weather sucked. The AI knows all this. Comes home, she wants to do her yoga. It knows this. It will respond. Maybe it will chill out. This is where the next level of creativity in architectural lighting design should come from. Right? This is the sorts of things that we should be doing that we're not doing if it's just the 4 downlights on the ceiling controlled by 5 buttons on the wall. Let's talk about retail for just a second. So much of retail is about branded experiences, storytelling, about narrative. Social media makes it all participatory. Are we even anywhere there when we're talking about retail lighting? No, we're still doing track fixtures. Stagnant, on, no control, one light, color, temperature, whole space is one pixel, basically. So how can we suddenly make our surfaces interactive, participatory branding? How does that impact someone's psychology? This was just something, a post I wrote. I was very inspired when I heard about Steven Spielberg's story where he was a child and he got a Super 8 camera, an old film camera. And he went off and built models, played with his friends. And just giving a child one old school manual film camera led to Steven Spielberg and that incredible pantheon of creativity. So let's give a child a virtual production studio driven by AI and see what their future is like. Let's make a wall surface that's a digital surface that's responsive to the child, that can understand the child is playing with blocks, playing with teddy bears, and has a conversation with the child and helps amplify and multiply their imagination, not replace it, not stifle it, not hijack it for sales and social media. This is how Hollywood and film and broadcast has moved to. This is like Star Trek's The Holodeck, where you could be anywhere at any time. This is Hollywood now. Most of the content you're watching on Netflix, even if it looks like some cozy home scene, will be shot in a virtual production studio because the windows and all that have replaced green screen. So this is like LED signage and spectacle lighting in Times Square in Las Vegas and all that made the scale of LEDs this big. The film and broadcast worlds are making the quality perfect, so it's almost indistinguishable from reality. I mean, this is not even tough to do. This is just some RGBW strip lights on the side and maybe some, LED display. And if you don't have the budget for a proper LED wall, just put a 100-inch LCD vertical. It's $1,200 at Walmart. Put it in with some nice trim work. What content should be on there? I mean, do you really want to be a cancer patient in the most dire state of your life in some clinically designed, one trough or overhead, same lighting all the time, it's on or off, a window that maybe looks at the parking garage? Or would you rather have a digital experience that's tailored because somebody said, hey, they really love tulips or they really love cherry blossoms and their favorite color is this? Claustrophobic conference rooms. So imagine if this room just ended there, right? You can see the detail. Imagine if that was just light. Yeah, you can put some wall washers on there. Good luck. It's still going to feel like a tiny little closet. But when that wall goes digital, it's suddenly an entire portal to a world beyond. I specifically made this to show it, a detail trick. If you imagine this in plan, that screen is not at the edge of that wall. That screen is actually 2 feet back, and it extends beyond that end wall there. And these fake mullions are literally just mullions. There's no glass there. But what happens is that gives you enough parallax so that when you're in that space, you see that it like continues out beyond the edges and it shifts behind those bars, and suddenly it feels hyper realistic. It feels like 3D. It's a cheat on the eye, it's a cheat on the human system, and it's something that, again, good designers can think about, and it doesn't require tracking technologies and all sorts of crazy stuff. The art of seduction and the act of immersion. Too much digital signage is just screaming at you. Signage and social media clips put on there, it's awful. How do you seduce someone into relaxing? How do you seduce someone into having energy? How do you seduce someone into being sharp and focused on their work or their environment? Okay, so let's start to add this up. Your environment has memory. It understands what you do. It can generate effects live. It controls every photon around you. Does it have consciousness? I mean, how many of you have used ChatGPT as a therapist or a friend? Is your space going to be your friend? Is your space going to have a memory of you? Is it going to remember when you've had good days, bad days? What does that look like? But, you can have all the toys, technical stuff, digital displays, media content, big data, right? And in the integrated systems Europe show, the AV world, they get this. You have the sensors, you have, menu boards, interactions, but this is still just stuff and things. And this doesn't add up to an experience. And what adds up to an experience is for people, how do you impact a human being? Well, you're making memories. You're driving their life. You're enriching their life so they have memories. You're driving actions that you want, for better or for worse. And from all of that action in the space, we're measuring, we're deriving knowledge of how people use these spaces so they can get smarter. And then you close that loop, and then suddenly you have the foundation for AI. This is just a quick AI renderings that I made. This is sort of high-end luxury retail. What happens when everything is a digital surface? The products are sitting on digital surfaces. If it's anything even close to architectural lighting, it's going to be RGBW, and it's going to be completely pixel controlled. And what does that feel like? How can brands use this? I think there's going to be this duality where a lot of the environmental lighting will be generative and live. A lot of the retail media branded parts will be prescriptive, classically made content. And there's going to be this sort of layering of spaces between we've decided it must look like this versus we've created the parameters of behavior and we're going to let the space run forward within those parameters into the future. I don't know about you, but I would like to be in this space. I think this would be a pretty cool shop. I would like to hang out there.